If you've ever played Minecraft before, or simply don't live in Africa, you're probably familiar with the concept of sustenance, otherwise known as food. And this concept is arguably rather important, as it is usually one of the very first things most people focus on when playing any form of survival game, as it generally tends to be rather useful to not die of starvation. In Minecraft specifically, I'm sure that you're aware that there are several aspects that food can help with. As with a full belly, we can sprint and swim freely, which is rather useful when you're being hunted down by a bunch of hoodlums on bath salts. Another thing that makes food a rather convenient asset to possess is that you can regain your HP if you're gluttonous enough, which is very epic. But now you might be wondering why I'm talking about food in a video game and wasting your time. And the answer to that is that a commenter on one of my last videos named Matty has suggested that I try to beat Minecraft hardcore without eating. Since I'm not particularly intelligent and lack a sense of self-preservation, I've decided to oblige. But in addition to this, I'll also not be wearing any armor whatsoever throughout this challenge. With that monstrous monologue out of the way, I got to creating our world. I was then immediately faced with a predicament. The main challenge here was to conserve as much hunger as possible, as I would most likely need it for when I inevitably do something stupid that almost gets me killed. And taking damage will eat away at your hunger at a faster pace than that of a single mother of three at an all-you-can-eat buffet. So the fact that I had spawned on top of a bunch of trees was less than ideal. But I then realized that I'm even dumber than I had initially been led to believe, as I could have just simply dug my way down using a tree. With that crisis averted in a highly professional manner with immaculate precision, I got onto some standard mining and crafting. My strategy, like with all my other worlds, was rather simple. The first step was to find a village to commit some good old criminal activities, laced with a hearty amount of violence and fraudulence in the form of trading. So off I went to carry out said meat pastime. A rather nice silver lining to this challenge is that we actually have some ways to conserve our energy. One of those being to mount various things such as boats, horses, camels, pigs, and so on, as you don't actually lose any hunger that way. And in no time, we had spotted our settlement of victims and got on to grabbing everything that wasn't nailed to the floor. I made sure to grab all of the hay bales I could get my hands on, as even though I couldn't craft them into bread and eat, we could still sell them to farmers for emeralds. I also killed the village golem, as I deemed that he would be more useful in the form of a bucket. Once our little pillaging session had come to an end, I started looking for a lava pool to make a portal. And rather luckily, I found one pretty much immediately, as the ground was randomly on fire, meaning that forest fires had once again come in clutch. I then constructed the portal and made my way to the place where people who pronounce GIF as GIF belong. But since everything has to go wrong whenever it's possible in my life, I was faced with the genitalia inverting realization that I had spawned in a box of netherrack and had to dig my way out like an absolute peasant. I did eventually make my way out of the wall that the game had non-consensually shoved me into and found myself in a crimson forest. Arguably one of the absolute worst biomes to start in, making my start in the nether honestly rather impressively unfavorable. Navigating through the nether was rather unsurprisingly an absolute nightmare. The nether is already about as pleasant of a place as the sauna at a gym at rush hour, but having to make sure to not take any damage at the same time as not sprinting to conserve my hunger made this even worse. And after having wandered around the nether for what felt like 26 minutes and 28 seconds, my toddler-level attention span got the better of me, and I made the executive decision to plunge into the forbidden jacuzzi. I then made myself yet another world in high hopes of getting a bit more luck. So I did the exact same thing as last time, but this time I got fisted almost twice as severely, as I wandered around the nether for an absolutely soul-crushing 50 minutes and 6 seconds before I finally gave up once more. But this time I was genuinely infuriated. Infuriated enough to open the world to LAN and go into spectator mode to see where the damn fortress was. But as I found it, I concluded that I wouldn't have found it even if I kept looking anyway, so I decided to be the bigger person and move on with my life. With that, I went on to my third attempt at this increasingly depressing and anxiety-inducing challenge. I found myself in a snow area, which was an absolutely abhorrent start, so I decided to make yet another world, as this one obviously didn't count. Once I had been epically bestowed upon the world once more, I repeated everything for a third time. Or at least that's what I tried doing, but I happened to run into a ruined portal with a bunch of lava before I found a village. So I decided to take to the nearby ocean and desecrate the final resting place for a bunch of people who were dumb enough to drown to get my hands on iron. I then struggled for dear life to make a portal, and ended up using the 2 pieces of obsidian that I had rather conveniently found in the chest by the portal. So I made my way through and had my genitalia inverted once more, as I found myself in a crimson forest. Needless to say, this was less than ideal. But rather luckily, I had spawned right by the edge of the crimson forest and didn't have to travel far to get out of it. And the euphoric news didn't stop there, as I laid my arguably unsettling eyes upon a bastion with an erotic volume of easily obtainable gold blocks. This could only be described as pure perfection, as this gold was going to be our one-way ticket of not having to crawl around in a river to dig a bunch of clay like some schmuck. And when life gives, it truly gives, as I also stumbled upon a fortress right next to the bastion we had found. But this is where things could potentially get rather annoying. If I were to die anywhere in this challenge, it was most likely going to be in a fortress, as it's full of mobs that are completely hell-bent on bestowing upon me a cataclysmically severe penetration of biblical proportions, the kind that people would write songs about in the days of old. So I definitely had to be rather careful. And our luck still hadn't run out, as I managed to safely make my way to a spawner that happened to be caged. It was then just a matter of setting myself on fire for absolutely no reason, as I inflicted excessive violence upon the homeowners on which I was intruding. Once our previously mentioned home visit had been carried out, I made my way back to the overworld. At this point, the game had become a bit too realistic for my liking, as I wasn't looking particularly healthy. But nonetheless, since we didn't find a village before we made our way to the Nether, I had to go off and find one. The main reason we wanted a village was because this is one of the areas of the game where I prefer a good old swindle over killing, as trying to go after Enderman puts me in the risk of getting clapped into an alternate reality. Fortunately, I did manage to find a village pretty much immediately, which was very epic. It was then just a matter of leveling up a cleric to grab our pearls, which was going to be easier than stealing candy from a diabetic who forgot his EpiPen, as we had gotten our hands on more gold than Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. But this didn't stop the game from violently rupturing me twice by not giving me my damn pearl trade. However, it couldn't keep up the rupturing forever. So I bought all of the pearls I needed, along with arrows and a bow from a Fletcher. I had also taken the liberty of stealing every single bed in the village in hopes of blowing up the dragon as quickly as possible. Though as I made my way to the stronghold, I realized that I had used up both of my pieces of obsidian whilst building our initial portal, meaning that we couldn't use the beds anyway, which was rather unfortunate. But since my actions don't have consequences, I happened to find a ruined portal with yet another piece of obsidian right by where the stronghold was. Safe to say, my erection was spectacular. And with that said erection, I made my way down to the stronghold and was faced with a less than pleasant situation. But my worries were rather quickly dealt with by a friendly neighborhood explosive fellow, meaning that I could go on searching for the portal. This was surprisingly easy, as I managed to find it pretty much instantly without encountering a single lurking delinquent, which was very epic. So I opened the portal and carried out yet another home invasion. Just as I always do, I immediately ran over to the fountain to place our bed along with our obsidian in preparation of the clapping I was about to inflict upon the dragon. But since I don't trust myself due to my lackluster track record, I also took out all of the crystals so that we wouldn't have to worry about the dragon unclapping itself. And in this process, I was hit with one of its puddles, which brought me down to 1.5 hearts, causing significant tension in my gluteal area. That said tension was then only made worse as I took a full heart of damage blowing up the first bed on the dragon. So with an empty health bar and overflowing pants, I decided to not go for the bed strategy, but instead go for the normal peasant way of killing it. I don't think I've ever experienced a panic as slow as this one, as I was on half a heart and couldn't run, meaning that a slight grace of a dragon puddle would slap me back to the Dark Ages. But rather luckily, I did manage to take it down, which was very epic, as I don't think I was mentally or emotionally prepared to go for another attempt at this. So there we have it. I beat Minecraft hardcore without eating. Another huge thank you to Matty for upping the severity of my mental decline. If you'd like to contribute to that as well, you can leave your suggestions in the comments down below. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little documented self-abuse of mine as much as I did. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.